Most people mistake compassion for being nice in a way that avoids conflict. But that's not compassion. That's people pleasing. That's fear or avoidance disguised as love. Think about it. You say yes when you mean no. You smile and nod while resentment builds. You collapse your own needs just to keep the peace. It feels like being a good person, but it's not compassion at all. And here's the problem. Every time you do that, your nervous system is reinforcing fear, not love. I want to unpack this because the difference between niceness and compassion is subtle, but it shapes everything. Niceness feels safe. It avoids conflict. It keeps things smooth on the outside. But compassion, real compassion, starts with accountability. It takes strength, discipline, and the ability to handle intensity. And when you see the gap clearly, you start to notice what you've actually been training in yourself and what it's costing you. Here's the thing, niceness isn't about love. It's a nervous system strategy. Most of us learn early on that if we're nice, if we smile, agree, smooth things over, then we'll be accepted. That felt safe when we were young, and so it stuck. But niceness trains avoidance. You get good at suppressing anger, ignoring sadness, or collapsing your own needs just to look agreeable. In what emotional state are you actually practicing when you do that? Not compassion, not love. You're practicing fear. You're practicing anxiety. You're practicing guilt. Let me make it practical. At work, you take on more than you can handle just to be seen as a team player. At home, you say, I don't mind, when you really do. In friendships, you apologize even when you did nothing wrong, just to keep the relationship comfortable. All of that looks like kindness, but really, it's your nervous system avoiding conflict. And the state you're reinforcing is fear. Now let's contrast that with compassion. Compassion isn't soft. It isn't about pleasing people. Compassion begins with accountability. That means if I want to stand in compassion, I take responsibility for my perception, my emotion, my thought, and my action. If I'm angry, I own that. If I'm sad, I own that. If I'm judging someone, I own that too. Compassion isn't possible if I can't face those emotions. Otherwise, I'm not choosing compassion, I'm just avoiding intensity. And here's where I think about martial arts. When I'm teaching Kung Fu, I tell my students, if you don't have the ability to land a strike, then pulling the strike isn't compassion. It's just lack of capacity. True compassion is when you could hurt someone, but you choose not to. You've trained the skill, you're capable of the intensity, and you redirect it with discipline. It's the same internally. If you can't face anger, sadness, or grief, then being kind isn't compassion, it's avoidance. But if you can feel the full force of those emotions, take accountability for them, and then choose to stand in love, that's compassion, that's strength. This is where people often get tripped up. They think compassion means skipping anger or pushing past grief or putting a smile on top of sadness. That's not compassion. That's avoidance disguised as kindness. True compassion requires facing the harder emotions and redirecting from them. Feeling them is part of it, but if you stop at just feeling them, you're still reinforcing the old state. Example, I've seen people who cover anger with politeness. They nod, they smile, they say, I'm fine. But inside, resentment builds. What they're actually training isn't compassion, it's suppression. Once they learn to acknowledge the anger, feel it without collapsing, and then redirect into love or patience, that's when compassion became steady. Because here's the truth. Without facing and redirecting the harder emotions, what we call compassion slips back into niceness or avoidance. Compassion isn't a concept. It isn't a mood that drifts in once in a while. It's a trained state, just like training a muscle. Every time you choose to take responsibility for your perception, every time you redirect from fear into love, every time you hold steady through emotional intensity, you're training compassion. And over time, your nervous system learns that pattern. It becomes stable. So compassion isn't something you hope shows up in the right moment. It becomes reliable. It's who you are, not just what you try to do. That's why it matters. Niceness breaks down under pressure. Compassion doesn't. If this is landing, hit subscribe. I drop videos each week to help you train your inner world with structure and clarity. Let's be real about the cost of getting this wrong. If you're living from niceness, here's what happens. You avoid conflict. You resent people in silence. You collapse your own needs to keep the peace. You reinforce fear into your nervous system. And the result? Exhaustion, bitterness, a quiet sense of inauthenticity. But compassion changes that. It allows you to feel anger, sadness, or fear without being run by them. It brings accountability. It lets you stand firm and kind at the same time. And here's something people often overlook. Compassion isn't just outward, it's inward too. Think about food. Eating junk when you're stressed might feel compassionate in the moment. It soothes. But that's not compassion, that's avoidance. Real compassion is choosing what nourishes your body, even if it's harder in the moment, because it aligns with strength. That's accountability to yourself. Compassion inward and compassion outward follow the same rule. Without accountability, it isn't compassion at all. Now, let's zoom out. This confusion between niceness and compassion doesn't just show up in our personal lives. It shows up in activism too. A lot of action gets labeled compassion, but if the state driving it is anger or fear, then that's the state being reinforced, not compassion. That's why you see shouting matches online, people canceling each other, people tearing down instead of building up. It's not that the issues don't matter, they do. But compassion is about the state you stand in while you act. So yes, you still speak truth. You still challenge what's harmful. But you do it from a trained state of love, not from the chaos of reactivity. And that's what makes action sustainable. It builds instead of just burning. So let's make this concrete. Imagine someone criticizes you. If you've been training niceness, you smile, nod, maybe say thank you. But inside, you're angry. You replay it over and over later. That's not compassion, that's repression. Compassion looks different. You notice the anger rise. You own it. You don't pretend it's not there. Then you choose. You might still thank them, but it's not fake, it's steady. You're directing yourself from accountability, not fear. Same in activism. Compassion doesn't mean silence. It doesn't mean letting things slide. It means you've trained your nervous system so that when you speak, your words carry strength without collapse, love without avoidance. That's the difference. That's compassion as a trained state. If you're hearing this and thinking, this sounds like me, you're not broken. You've just been reinforcing a pattern that no longer serves. And the good news? Patterns can change. You can train a new state, one that aligns with who you want to be. Let's call it what it is. Compassion takes courage because it means you stop hiding behind strategies. You stop managing perception. You stop playing small. You face your nervous system. You take ownership of every perception, every emotion, every thought, every action. And then you choose again and again to train compassion instead of fear. That's what makes it courageous, not because it's dramatic, but because it requires discipline. And discipline, repeated, creates freedom. Every moment is a choice. Are you reinforcing fear or are you training love? So here's my question for you. What emotional state are you practicing over and over without even realizing it? Is it niceness, avoidance, fear, or is it compassion? If you're ready to stop repeating old patterns and start training a steady, resilient state, I've built a system for that. It integrates perception, emotion, thought, and nervous system, so you don't just understand your patterns, you actually shift them. The link's below. I also share practices weekly on Instagram at Mike Wong Coaching, and you can join the newsletter for more depth. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next video.